It is so cold this morning. Oh my goodness. It's colder than both Hillary Clinton and Jill Stein combined. Thank you for joining me. Bill Colley on KLIX. My teeth are still chattering. I was outside a few minutes ago just doing a quick check. My thermometer, maybe the building is warming things up. It says it's 15. But when I pulled into the parking lot this morning, the temperature on my gauge read 9. And then somebody told me on Facebook they had 7 at their house. So somewhere in the, I don't, it's where you live. I mean, in a particular part of the valley versus another particular part. My guess is our temperature swings this morning are anywhere from 5 to 15. And then if you're over in the eastern part of Idaho, probably down below 0 in some spots. Good place to start the day because we're only going to go up. That's a wonderful thought, right? While you're putting on another layer of clothing this morning. I do thank you for joining us. Coming up in about 20 minutes, Steve Millington is going to join us. He's the chairman of the Twin Falls County Republican Party. I got a listener out in the Rupert Burley area, who tells me that he would just wish I would go away and so he could hear Steve. And look, everybody has their own favorites and their own opinions, and that's fine. The guy jumped all over me one day saying that I introduced Steve with a minute to go in the first half hour and then cut him off for the break. Well, we have no choice. We have to take the break. That's what supports this radio station. Number two, he wasn't supposed to be here in the first half hour. So it was my way of introducing him. But, the guy out there who's 2 beers short of a six-pack doesn't know that, I suppose. Couple of things I wanted to mention right off the top of the show today. And we've got a lot to talk about. In fact, I don't do this a lot. Let me just tell you what my notepad looks like here. The following notes read illegals, energy, oil, EPA, Steve, that would be our guest coming up, states, that's dealing with some news about the big states who think that we should lose the Electoral College and that we shouldn't get all of the federal funding they claim we're getting when we don't deserve it. The libs and their depression, that is, their mental depression, abortion, dope, meaning marijuana, culture, Trump, and economy. Now, will we get to all of those things today? I don't know, but we're going to try. This from the Daily Signal. A Georgia state legislator said sanctuary college campuses should not receive taxpayer dollars. Have you heard the latest? Jerry Brown, a one-time marijuana smoker himself and governor of California, nicknamed Governor Moonbeam, has suggested he is going to turn this entire state into a sanctuary state. Now, in some parts of California, it is more conservative than others. It may not fly with everybody in his state. So if states can make their own laws and ignore federal laws, I guess localities can then ignore state laws. Seemed to me that if that's liberal logic, that will take it to its conclusion. The fellow said it's a simple equation. If you don't follow the law, the state funds are not going to follow you. That from Georgia State Representative Earl Earhart. He's a Republican from Powder Springs, Georgia. He was a guest on Fox and Friends yesterday morning. Law Breaking 101 is a new course, I guess, at some of these schools. In Georgia, we already have a law against sanctuary cities, and I guess we need a law against sanctuary campuses. He said that on Fox and Friends during his appearance there. This is only going to make the liberals angry. It's a little bit like having a telephone conversation with a Taiwanese president, because that makes the Chinese angry, and being fellow travelers, American liberals have the same reactions to these types of things. Speaking of illegal immigration, it does appear. Now, if you've been doing any of the reading about what's going on at the border, President Obama has opened it up like a sieve so they can try to squeeze in as many future Democrats before Mr. Trump takes control and starts taking some action. But all of that talk that, Trump only was saying that to get votes, it's starting to look as if Trump means what he said while he was campaigning. And a lot of those people who are not big Donald Trump fans are paying a lot more attention to him now, especially on the American right, including Dr. Charles Krauthammer, who made an appearance with Bill O'Reilly last night on the O'Reilly Factor on Fox News. And he's talking about past failures, but how we can make it work this time.
Remember, they got swindled with the Reagan amnesty in 1986. They were told we're going to secure the border. They amnestied 3 million illegal immigrants. And, of course, the amnesty went through. Shutting of the border did not. So I would emphasize a couple of things. I would include, I agree with you about the barrier. I think it should be a serious barrier, either a wall or a fence. I'd advocated this ever since 2006. But also, you've got to do interior enforcement, Bill. So many of the illegal immigrants are people who overstay the visa. You've got to have a visa tracking system. And the second is E-Verify. If people come across the border and they're coming here to work, if they can't find work, because an E-Verify system automates the checking to see if they're legal, they're not going to come over.
It's not a foolproof system, as you know, though.
No,
we did it last week. We did a phony document segment on this program, very easy to get. You can get a 3-pack in L.A. Everybody knows where to get it. So I like the E-Verify, but look, Trump has to present himself as a man who's not vindictive. Would you agree with that? He's not vindictive. I'm just want to protect the nation.
Well, I think you can make that case. By the way, on the E-Verify, what you're doing is you're doing layers. You don't expect any layer to catch everybody, and that's why you do one layer.
No, it make it harder. I understand that, but
yeah, but I think
people think it's foolproof.
What you got to do, it doesn't matter how you present it. You got to have results. If I were Trump, I would institute these steps right away, working with Congress. You've got the majority. Do it.
Get it done. Get it out of the way. And, I was watching some of the comments from Paul Ryan the other night when he was on 60 Minutes, and he's pretty much echoing the same thing. They feel that they've got to strike while the iron is hot and get a lot of these things done and get them done quickly, because you don't know when you're going to get another chance. A nation without borders and with no respect for the law is not a nation. Let's make that clear. A lot of people out there, you're globalists and frankly, your fellow travelers in the Democrat Party. This is what they want. They never liked the United States anyway. They'd like to dissolve it so we can have a workers' paradise like they have in, I don't know, Venezuela or Cuba, somewhere nice like that, or even with their good friends in China, where any dissent, of course, is punished by sending you off to a re-education camp where your organs are then harvested so they can keep some wheezing old Communist Party boss alive. They don't use anesthetic, by the way. We should point that out, too. But they're wonderful people, and we shouldn't do anything that would annoy them, after all, because it's only going to make them angry. I've got to tell you, we've reached a point, I think, in this country where, and maybe Election Day was a good sign of it, we're going to see more of it. I think that the liberals have reached their high water mark. And I think that there's a movie and book called A Bridge Too Far. Some of you may recall it. The movie version, it was a big star vehicle for Sean Connery. But it's about the effort to take the bridge at Arnhem in World War II. They thought they could sweep through Holland and into northern Germany and then quickly end the war by a strike into Berlin, and it didn't work. And so A Bridge Too Far, that was the bridge they were unable to take, and then they had to back off, and the war got prolonged for many, many more months, and a lot more people died because of that. Well, the liberals, who claim they've won the culture wars and then turned around and made everything about culture wars and ignored economic issues in this country, didn't win anything. They only managed to raise the ire of the average American. Now, the other part of this, too, is you're seeing liberals are reviving the phrase states' rights. Now, only a few years ago, those of us in the Tea Party movement, when we talked about the 10th Amendment, and to a lesser extent the 9th Amendment, we were criticized, and people would say, oh, you want to turn America back to the old Jim Crow days, and yeah, you're going to make black people into slaves, and they're not going to be able to vote, and then you're going to make them pick cotton, and oh, goodness gracious, oh, you hateful, rotten, bigoted racists. Now you've got liberals all talking about reviving states' rights so they can do things as they please. That California secession talk, which we mentioned on the air yesterday, go ahead, leave. We don't care. Get the heck out. We'll help you, whatever you want to do. We'll throw up the barbed wire at the roads. No one can go in or out if that's what you prefer. And I think that the people in this country have gotten so disgusted. This won't be like 1861. If some of these people decide to go, we're going to tell them, don't let the door hit you in the backside. That's simply how it's going to work. And then within 10 years, there was a piece today that I happened to see. I think it's in Washington Times. And it describes in some detail what we've seen happen. It's called the Blue State Depression. I just want to share a few things with you about some election results out of it, because we get a mention. I'm going to go to page 2 of this. Stephen Moore, the writer, he's an economist, and also he's been advising Donald Trump. Of the 10 blue states that Hillary Clinton won by the largest percentage margins, those would be California, the People's Republic of Massachusetts, Vermont, Hawaii, Maryland, New York, Illinois, Rhode Island, New Jersey, and Connecticut. Every single one of them lost domestic migration, excluding immigration, over the last 10 years. Nearly 2.75 million more Americans left California and New York than entered these states. They're all progressive, high tax rates, high welfare benefits, heavy regulation, environmental extremism, super minimum wages, most outlaw energy drilling. Now, let's look at the 10 states that had the largest percentage vote for Donald Trump. Every one of them: Wyoming, West Virginia, Oklahoma, North Dakota, Kentucky, Tennessee, South Dakota, and Idaho was a net population gainer. Hey, liberals, anybody home? You get it? People are beginning to vote with their feet. And if this continues, this population disparity claiming that, well, these little states have too much power and these little states are going to become much bigger states, and that power is going to be evened out even more so, and those liberal states are going to be hemorrhaging voters and which is why they want to bring people in here illegally if they can, because goodness gracious, that way we can still try to overwhelm everyone else. Won't that be great? Won't that just be wonderful? And then we can make sure that we give everybody else everything you've worked for. And America will run just fine, even though, of course, we'll raise the overall national debt to, I don't know, $300-400 trillion. Yeah. But then we'll make the rich pay their fair share. And then David Ferdoso, writing at the Washington Examiner, has this today. A guy writing in the New York Times over the weekend named Stephen Johnson claimed that the big states pay more taxes than they get in return. So I wanted to mention this. Ferdoso says Johnson is correct so long as you look at raw federal spending data and each state's contribution to federal revenue as if all government spending were equal. For obvious reasons, though, they chose a remote site in New Mexico to design and build the atomic bomb. In other words, they decided not to build it in the middle of a big city like New York. To this day, the presence of the laboratory helps bring an oversized take of federal spending to a small rural state every year, but it's not a reason for New Yorkers to feel oppressed. Remember that defunct or at least stalled attempt to build a nuclear waste storage facility in Nevada. As of 2013, $38 billion in federal money had been thrown at it, substantially more than that state's annual budget. Even so, you might recall that Nevadans did not feel privileged about this government subsidy. Or even consider the other western states, he writes, where the federal government owns a large majority of the land and spends a lot of taxpayer money making sure most of it won't ever be put to any good use, and some would argue even managing it in such a way that makes large wildfires more likely. Speaking of which, Ferdoso writes, I know a lot of Idahoans would absolutely love to give back the $6.5 million that the feds spent to reintroduce wolves into their forests, or better yet, spend the same amount to humanely recapture the animals and give them a new home in Central Park. Yes. See the liberals running through the park trying to escape that. Ah! They wouldn't be worried about racist, bigots, Republicans any longer. They'd have something more important on their minds. Well, as I understand it, they don't really taste very good. They're all sinewy from, eating all that tofu and running every day. 20 minutes after 8 o'clock. I'll take some of your telephone calls in just a couple of minutes. Be patient. I have 17 here at the studios. Obviously, somebody's outside breathing on the thermometer. Steve Millington will join us in about 10 minutes as well, right here on Top Story with Bill Colley on News Radio 1310, KLIX, and newsradio1310.com. I wanted to mention a telephone number. I know we had some people who were trying to reach us at the tail end of the last segment of the program, and if you were one of them, but you didn't know how to reach us, we've got to give you the telephone number. It's 736-0300. My email address is bill.colley@townsquaremedia.com. I do tend to give a little bit more of a favoritism to the telephone callers because it is considered to be an audio medium. Radio is not, I'm not reading a newspaper out loud all morning long. I could if you wanted to. Who was it? Gordon Liddy used to host a syndicated talk show. A friend of mine actually served with Liddy's son in the Marine Corps and said he's really a super, super guy. Liddy said that when he first started hosting a talk show, he said what he would do, back in the day before the internet got really big, a lot of people around the country, they couldn't get their hands on newspapers like the Washington Times. He would literally read from columns in the Washington Times, and he says it electrified his audience. No, not just about everybody has access to that. Wanted to mention our good friends at Waddell and Reed. I referenced earlier that we do have sometimes these breaks in the show, and that's because we have some wonderful people in this community who are willing to stand up and essentially they want their voices heard too, but they also keep the lights on here at the radio station. And my friends at Waddell and Reed do that, but they do much more. They actually help you plan for the future so that when you get older, you can keep the lights on too. Feed yourself, pay the bills, and do all of those things because day's going to come when you choose not to work anymore, or you may not be able to work anymore. They offer mutual funds, among the oldest companies in the country to do it, and they do something very rare. They actually offer two. And I've been saying it. They're not going to throw your money away like it's a casino. If your brother-in-law has some harebrained idea to sell pet rocks and says this is the next best thing, they will not put the money there. They'll do it in a wise and conservative fashion and go with what has traditionally worked. Now, they're also going to make sure they tailor this to your individual needs because they realize everybody has a different set of goals down the road, and they do take the planning personally at Waddell and Reed right here in Twin Falls. 824, Bill Colley with you on Top Story on News Radio 1310 KLIX and newsradio1310.com. I'm watching that temperature gauge roll back and forth. Some minutes it reads 15, then it flips and says 17, then it flips back to 15. So depending on whoever is breathing on the thermometer outside this morning, they walk away for a minute, I lose a couple of degrees. I know they're doing that just to spite me. Hey, speaking of cold, wouldn't you like a little global warming today? And speaking of global warming, when was the last time you heard the voice of Albert Gore Jr.?
I had a lengthy and very productive session with the president-elect. It was a sincere search for areas of common ground. I had a meeting beforehand with Ivanka Trump. The bulk of the time was with President-elect Donald Trump. I found it an extremely interesting conversation and to be continued.
And then I put him to sleep because I'm such an exciting talker. And he said, "Thank you very much, Albert, for the nap," when he finally woke up. And then I got on the elevator. I like riding on elevators. I find it very stimulating. And then I came down here to the lobby to tell all of you about it. Albert Gore Jr. He apparently, Trump saw him there, Gore having a meeting with one of Trump's daughters, and said, "Hey, pop in for a minute." Now, a lot of people out there are being very critical of this. Why would he meet with a scoundrel like Al Gore Jr.? Is he going to flip-flop on climate change, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? Personally, from my own vantage point, I think Donald Trump is talking with a lot of people, and I don't think it's a bad thing to listen to a lot of different voices and get a lot of different input, because down the road, you're going to need some people on some things you're trying to get done. And you know what? We keep hearing it from the left. Oh, the Republicans are obstructionists. They refuse to work across the aisle. Well, here you go. Here's Donald Trump willing to talk and listen to anybody who might have some input. Doesn't mean it's going to change his mind, but there's that old line we used to use with the Soviet Union. We need a dialogue with the communists. So we need to have a dialogue. And so then we'd go out and have a dialogue, and then they'd go in and crush Hungary or Czechoslovakia or some little country like that. Steve Millington, I want to thank you for joining us this morning. Al Gore Jr. meeting with the president-elect. You as a diehard, dyed-in-the-wool Republican, what's your reaction?
I'm kind of in your camp on this one, Bill. I think it's informative and useful for the president-elect to make contact with as many voices as he thinks he needs to. There's an awful lot of stuff that's going to have to be accomplished in the next 4 years. And in order to do that, like you referenced, he's going to need a lot of voices and a lot of helping hands to get it done. He doesn't have to buy in to what Al Gore has been proposing the last 15 years. Not at all. But just to sit down and listen with him and get his opinion on things doesn't hurt a thing. The more information you can gather, the easier your decision-making process will become. And why alienate people? We may need them. We can listen to them, pat them on the back, have the photo op, wave our hands, and when they leave, we can say, well, that was interesting, but there was nothing to be gained.
We're going to take a quick call. We've got about 60 seconds before the break. We'll get a caller in, and then we can always mention it afterwards, too. A caller, you're up next. You're on KLIX with Steve Millington and Bill Colley.
Good morning. Oh,
I guess the caller decided I'll throw in the towel. 1 minute isn't enough for some people.
We'll call after the break so we can.
We're also going to be talking about a potential constitutional convention. This subject came up when Mr. Kasich came here last year, right?
Yes.
And you saw the presentation?
Yep. He, John, is it John Kasich? It is, isn't it? He has been an advocate of a constitutional convention for a very defined, limited purpose. And as I recall, his purpose was fiscal responsibility. In other words, a balanced federal budget.
And we're really close right now to the states being able to call this without the need of the federal government.
That's right. You see, we have two methods to call a constitutional convention. The Congresses, by 2/3 majorities, can initiate a constitutional convention, and the states can do exactly the
just
same
34.
thing.
So
It
you
only
need a few less.
Yep,
huh?
it only takes 34 states. I think that's 2/3 to initiate a constitutional convention. So we could have some very interesting stuff. Oh boy, yeah.
And with 33 legislatures around the country now controlled by the GOP. We'll talk about that and the pitfalls, too, that might come about in just a couple of minutes. Steve Millington is the Twin Falls County Republican chairman joining us in studio this morning. It's 8:30, 15 right now. Bill Colley with you as well on Top Story on News Radio 1310, KLIX and NewsRadio1310.com.